Well, hello, everyone, and welcome back. This is episode 3 of the Confessions of an Astrologer podcast. I'm Charly McCreary, your host, and I'm happy to be back today having another conversation with John Wadsworth. How are you today, John?
I'm good. Hi, Charlie. Nice to see you. Yeah, glad we
Nice
can
to
do this
see
again.
you. Yeah, me too. I'm really excited about our topic today. We are going to be talking about the ethics of astrological practice. So this is a really juicy topic. We're going to talk about the history of astrology, how that's a little bit complex and checkered in terms of how it's perceived in society, the expectations and prejudices people have about astrological practice. And then, John, I have some questions for you today about the different roles that astrologers have in society, and more importantly, potentially in the lives of the clients that we work with. So with that, shall we dive in?
Let's dive in. It's rich. That's rich pickings, isn't it?
It is. It is. I think that this could be multiple conversations, but we'll get to a lot today. I'm excited as well. So why don't we start with, I'd love to hear your thoughts, John, on sort of what is the common perception of astrologers these days in our modern world? What do people think it is that we do when they come to us?
It's such a big question now, and it's such a complex question, and it can't really be separated out from the history of astrology either, and the way that, astrology has always been on the margins of whatever, the prevailing cultural narrative is. It's sort of always been said, whether that's been a religious narrative, whether it's a scientific narrative, whether it's a kind of modern intellectual. Astrology is anathema, or has been anathema to all of those mainstream kind of perspectives on the world, and it's always been subversive of it. So in a way that already puts us at odds with mainstream thinking. And so the capacity for misunderstanding and misconceiving what we think astrology is, for a start, we have to be clear on that, right? Because I'm sure you talk to a bunch of different astrologers and we'd all come up with different ways of describing what it is that we do. So I think it's a good
I think so, yeah.
way of diving in. So yeah, I mean, what would you say it is?
I in my journey with astrology, which has been decades now as well, it's really evolved. I think that what I thought it was initially in my practice was, well, I'm an intermediary between the chart and the stars and the person that wants to know what's there. And I still believe that that's true, but my thinking on it has definitely deepened, and that it's a lot more than that. And we're going to talk about this today. So spoiler alert, but there's a counseling aspect to astrology that in the spirit of my own confession of an astrologer, I think I minimized or didn't fully appreciate in my 20s when I really started studying astrology and wanting to become a consulting astrologer. So what's your definition currently today, John, about what astrologers do, who we are for people, what our role is? How are you defining it at this point in your practice, decades in?
Well, we're in a mediating role. We're mediating a cosmic perspective, I guess we could say. A perspective that comes out of an understanding of planetary movements. An understanding of the cycles of bodies which are moving around us in space, or appearing to, and we're somehow making a connection between that and what's going on in our lives here on Earth, right? I mean, that's already a stretch, isn't it? I mean, that is beyond the credulity of most people those things could be connected. So that's the first place, is that we are working on the basis, or on the assumption, or in the faith that there is a connection between these planetary movements, these planetary bodies, and the way that our own lives turn and move, and that our character is somehow shaped by this. And so, I guess when a client comes to us, they want to know about their lives. They want deeper insight into themselves, their choices, their path, their destiny, their origins, their history, their karma, who they are, what they're doing, where they're going, where they're, the more insight into where they're from and the nature of their relationships, right? I mean, these are and their money and their, their health. These kinds of questions are the burning questions. That's what brings them. That's what brings a client, or would bring any, we could be the client, right? That we would bring any of us to see somebody, and if somebody can give us insight into that, then, how amazing that could be the case, particularly if we're then going to look to patterns in the heavens as the way into that, right? So are we diviners? Are we divining something from the stars? And if we are, what does that mean?
Good
which
question.
brings up the whole question of, is astrology divination? And what do we even mean by that term? I mean, this is something that when I did my master's degree in cultural astronomy and astrology, this was a big question. And I wrote a lot about it at the time, but we had to try and define the term, what we meant by
Definitely.
divination. I don't know what, does that mean we're predicting what's going to happen? Or does it mean that we are trying to be present to the synchronicity of life as it is occurring now in the moment, and that somehow there is a correspondence or a resonance between patterns in the heavens and all the mediating mythology and symbolism that comes to us through those patterns, and the life of a person who's sitting in front of us with these symbols arranged in a particular way on a chart, right? So what are we doing? What do we do?
Yeah.
What do we think we're doing, and what does the person sitting opposite us think that we're doing, right?
Those can be two very different things, I've discovered. And I was just reflecting on something you just said and thinking about the word to divine or divination, and how it's rooted in the same word that we use for God or spirit, or however we relate to metaphysical principles. And it's interesting. And so now I'm curious, and I think you and I have talked about this before outside of the podcast, but I think our listeners would be interested. Do you view astrology as a partially divinatory practice?
I think I've been backwards and forwards with this a lot, but I think I would say so, yeah. Because I think for me, the way that I've come to understand divination is that there is something other than human that is participating with my consciousness, with my imagination, when I'm faced with an arrangement of symbols in a birth chart, in a live engagement with someone. There is something happening that is not that isn't just me translating symbols into English, so that these aren't pre-written, at least in my understanding. They're not pre-written like, well, this means that means that means that, So something is going on that is a participation between my imagination, the person's intention and inquiry, and their desire to have meaning, to have some kind of meaning realized for them, and something other than that, something which we can't easily define, and I think that we could call, maybe some kind of serendipitous force that is present in the interaction. And I think that's a crucial element of it that we can maybe we can explore here a bit, what that is, or what's going on. And something that comes to me is something that Jeffrey Cornelius talks about in his wonderful book, The Moment of Astrology, which is a book about divination, and it's also a book about horary astrology, and he looks at the whole philosophy behind it, and he makes this great distinction between the speculative and the realized interpretation. The speculative interpretation is really taking all the things that we've come to know about a symbol. So you might think about what does Saturn in the 10th house in Aries mean, you know, and so you would take all the things that you would think about, well, you know, Saturn in Aries, you know, I don't know, somebody who wants to kind of, you know, be their own authority or fight against authority, and, you know, and something like that. And then it's in the 10th house, well, that's about prestige and, you know, and standing up in the world and standing for something. So, you know, you might have those ideas about what that means, but that only gets you to the kind of threshold. It doesn't take you through the portal, through the gateway. That would be what he called the realized interpretation. So, and that comes through the particular engagement. Obviously, you've got all the different ways that that's going to sit within the chart. So there's all the different permutations of a chart, of course, that's part of it. But it's also that comes within the context of the inquiry of the moment of where it's happening. All those other factors are present. And if that an interpretation is realized, then it seems to come out of somewhere else that you couldn't have predicted, right? You didn't know about before.
Yeah, absolutely. And I share your perspective that I have come in and out of my thinking around whether or not astrological practice is divinatory practice. And where I've landed with it right now is there is an aspect of that. There are larger forces present in the practice beyond just the chart, the client, and the astrologer. And when I'm speaking with someone, there are sometimes moments where parts of the chart that didn't initially grab my attention upon first review suddenly have a light shining on them and saying, me, I talk about me. And it can lead to really profound moments in sessions that I never would have anticipated. And so I really believe that there is an aspect of, as you said, something else, something greater. Perhaps it is the cosmic sympathy that we share with these heavenly bodies, using us as a vessel to call attention to things that are important, that need to be named or uncovered or explored or transformed. So I'm with you, John. I do think there is a divinatory element to what we do, for sure. Yeah. Anything else you want to add on that before I move on to my next question?
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking about this. I mean, one thing I would add to it is that what's happening is an improvised experience. You know, we as an astrologer, you're improvising in the moment. You might have some ideas. You might look at the chart before, and you know, maybe you've made some notes, worked out where the transits are, and you know, had a few ideas. But then when it comes to actually a live session with someone, that's, you know, that has to just be suspended, because, you know, you've got to be with what's present. Especially, you know, you don't know who's going to walk through the door. You don't know what they're going to bring. And what they bring is going to, you know, alter and affect what, you know, not just the content of what you say, but also the way that you say it, the way that you hold the space, and the way that you respond. And so, you know, and that, you know, it's really an exercise in listening as much as it is in, you know, we can come with our ideas, but we've got to be really open to what happens. And I think we've got to listen to the person, obviously, but we're also listening for something else, something more subtle than that. You know, I often think, you know, here we are talking about the planets as if they're not there, right? Or whatever when we say planet, what do we mean? You know, we're talking about these planetary forces or energies or beings or something, you know, something, and there they are on a piece of paper or on the screen. And what if we actually invite them in to speak to us? Can we listen at that level so that we can respond to what could come in from elsewhere.
That's beautiful, John. I love that imagery of inviting the planets in,
Mm.
because they're already here. They're already with us. So why not consciously and intentionally invite them into the conversation? And I just had a couple things to add on what you were just saying. It was really sparking some thoughts for me. One is that I have only been seeing clients for a few years myself, despite studying astrology for a long time. One thing I learned quickly was that I can spend tons of time preparing for a session, as you name, making some notes, researching transits, making sure that I'm hitting all the things that feel important to me in the session. And as you said so beautifully, when we show up with our own agenda and our own need to kind of take up space with the client about what we think is important, my opinion, and it's just an opinion, is that it's a bit of a disservice to being present in the moment and the listening that is possible with our client, and that I think they deserve from us. I mean, the time is about them. It's about what they need and what they want to talk about, and holding space for whatever comes up. So that's definitely been a learning for me in the last few years of seeing clients, is just, yes, do some preparation, make some notes, know what's going on, and be prepared to just hold space for what wants to emerge. I think it's so important to allow the improvisation, as you so beautifully named, relationship and dynamic, to have space and be what it is, and not let that become eclipsed or overshadowed by our own agenda of what we think is important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I think that's right. It's interesting what you said, about, whether you've thought about becoming a counselor, as an astrologer or not, or whether that was your motivation, or whether you would have pursued it if you thought that's where it would end up. And it makes me reflect on what it was for me that actually got me so excited. But it wasn't the idea of counseling others, or even initially around helping others. It was a passion. It was something that I saw that could reveal things about myself. And more than that, it was a way of connecting with the metaphysical aspect of life, with meaning. And that was so exciting. It was that there was something other than me. There was something other than just the mundane that was at play in my life. And that was, I can't describe how exciting that was to be in the presence of that. And I think that's why I love teaching astrology, or introducing people to astrology, whether that's through doing a one-to-one session with them, or through joining a course or a class. Because until that fire is, if that fire is lit in us, I think it opens up a path. And I think this brings in another aspect of it. I mean, not all astrologers want to become consulting astrologers either, or counseling astrologers.
No, it's true.
But I think
we have research astrologers, they're useful too.
Of course, yeah. But even if you're just researching astrology, it's important not to think not to kill the thing that you're researching, to always remain open to the magic that's there. When I find a beautiful example of astrology working, and you see, I always say this to my students, like, don't take that as a given. Don't expect to see, the event corresponding with the transit, or the textbook definition of a natal signature playing itself out. Every time you see something like that, accept it as a gift. Accept it as a serendipity, as a synchronicity, and as a reminder that there's something magical going on that you can't really explain. Because the minute we try and see this as some kind of inevitable system, we get caught up in what I think is a misunderstanding that the planets are somehow causing things to happen, or that there is some inevitable kind of causal relationship between what's happening up there and what's happening in here. It's not as simple as that. And thank God it isn't, because it would completely kill the magic if it was.
Yeah, I was just thinking that. Thank goodness. Yeah, I'm grateful for that. Definitely.
Yeah.
Related kind of to what you were just touching on, as astrologers, and I think, again, if we asked 20 astrologers this question, we would get 20 different answers. But I think being clear about what our intention is with our astrological practice feels really important, even if that evolves or changes over time, or maybe it's even specific to different types of clients and what their needs are and where they are in their life. But how do you think the role of having clarity around our intention as practitioners shows up in the practice? How do you work with this idea of intention, whether you're teaching students, which I know that you do a lot of teaching, or doing a client session, or even looking at your own chart? What is the role of intention in that, and how does it play into some of these ethical questions that we're exploring today?
I think it's crucial, and when I think about intention, it reminds me that what we're involved in is some kind of ritual engagement with the symbolism, with the chart. Because the minute you put an intention into something, you imbue it with will, with your own will, with a desire. I think desire plays a very interesting and important role in astrological work. And I think, this is why if someone came to me, and it happens, of course, someone comes and you say, well, what would you like from the session? What intention would you put in? And they go, oh, I'm just curious to see what's there,
That's not really an intention, I would say.
That's not enough. There's not enough there.
No,
it's like,
it's not.
Be bland, and and what I figure is, well, if the planets are kind of waiting, to like respond, and you're just going, well, I'm just curious, and the planets will go, well, you don't care so much, I don't care so much. Maybe this.
Yeah, I might not know if I'm going to show up to this party if nobody really.
Well, I think the more our desire comes toward what we're doing, whether that's the desire of the client or the desire of the astrologer, and hopefully it's both. And I think the more passion, the more desire that comes in that intention of what you want from the session, but also the intention that you have as the astrologer, and the clarity that you have in how you're showing up in your practice. That intersection, I think, awakens the participation of the planetary forces. And then I think you can get into much more interesting territory. And I think you have a much more dynamic session.
Yes, I agree completely, John. I love that. And I was just reflecting on, so one of my favorite books that I first read over 20 years ago and keep going back to is Mircea Eliada's The Sacred and the Profane. And that book is a lot about sacred time and sacred space, and how culturally and in different religious and spiritual traditions, people define and create sacred space as differentiated from profane space. And Eliada doesn't specifically enumerate intention, but that's been a big part of my takeaway of working with that material for so long now, is that intention is a huge part of it. And I think anytime we're going into any sort of a divinatory or ritualistic or spiritual context, I cannot underemphasize intention for me. I think it's so important. And I loved your example about a client showing up and going, I'm just curious. I've seen it in plant medicine ceremonies when people show up and sit down for ceremony and are invited to speak an intention, and people kind of go, I don't know, I'm just here to experience this. And then the type of experience that they have that night in their journey is potentially very different than someone who comes in with a really clear held heartfelt intention for the potential of the work that they're going to do that night. And so I think that that's important in astrological practice. And I ask a similar question of my clients when we start our sessions. What would you like to talk about today? What are your goals? What's your intention? And if there is a level of ambivalence or kind of not willingness to go there at the start, I kind of push back on that. And I say, well, I think our time together is going to be a lot more fruitful and productive potentially if we spend a minute now creating some intention for the work. So, yeah.
I'm the same. I'll always dig in deeper. If someone's not clear or they're a bit vague or they're, a bit of evasive of that question of intention, I'll stay with it maybe for the first 10, even 15 minutes of a session until we get somewhere. You need to get to that. Otherwise, for me, there's not enough potency to activate the session. Because for me, the chart, the possibilities of meaning that are in the chart, I believe, kind of lie latent in it until there's enough desire in the inquiry to activate it. It needs to be activated. And it's great you've used the plant medicine analogy. It's for me, it's a perfect analogy. It's like, you're going to go in, potentially we're going to go into an altered state experience, even in an astrological consultation, particularly if we're inviting in the possibility that there are forces that want to participate with us, and that's very different to thinking, the astrologer's got some knowledge and I want to find out what they know about me, and and I'm really not interested in that.
I'm not either. I don't see skeptical clients. I'm not here to prove that astrology works to anyone if they're not already open to it. I'm sure there are other astrologers that would take on clients like that. I'm not one of them.
Because I don't even know what that means. When people say, even this is the thing we have to deal with, of course. We're in one of those professions where, one of the few professions where, you're at a dinner party and someone asks you what you do and you say, well, I'm an astrologer. And a possible response to that is, you don't believe in all of that nonsense, do you?
Oh, yes.
You wouldn't say that about a lawyer. Well, I don't know. It depends how you feel about lawyers, or an accountant or a, these are kind of, you wouldn't say that. It wouldn't make sense, or a language teacher or something. But, we're in a profession which requires supposedly that you're supposed to believe in the thing that, that there is. So for me, that's a question of, so the whole, can I prove this? There's two aspects to it, of course. Am I here to prove astrology, or am I here to prove that I'm a good astrologer? There's two aspects to it in this sense, which is tricky, isn't it? Because, what is it that we're supposed to be proving? Or are we in a context where actually we're going to dive in together into an inquiry where we are open to the possibility that something meaningful, something healing. Here's another important area for me that's very important. That astrology can be a vehicle for healing, and for me, healing can also come through the realization of meaning. And so if we're going to be open to that, then that's a very different thing than prove to me that this works. And that proves, and it's perfectly legitimate that somebody would want. Maybe they haven't got any faith. Maybe they think that the life's just empty and meaningless, and maybe astrology could prove them wrong. That's a legitimate inquiry. I don't dismiss or underestimate the what's behind that. But I'll if that is the intention that someone's bringing, then we can dig into it a bit. And maybe they do need I think it's legitimate. Maybe they do need to see that there is. So sometimes as astrologers, and this makes us different from counsellors, because a counsellor wouldn't really be expected to be able to know what's going on about you when, without you haven't told them something. So there is sometimes an aspect of that with astrology, is that you can speak from your knowledge, your understanding, and it often doesn't take much either to open up, because it builds trust, I think, when you can say something to a client about themselves, which is, which touches a place, And again, I think if you're open in your practice and you're open and you're already in a dialogue with these forces, these planetary forces with the zodiac, then they will help you to build that bridge with a skeptical client as well. So I'm not going to go oh, I don't work with skeptical clients, of course, and we're not going to do that, are we? We could invite in their skepticism, which is perfectly legitimate, but then we have to be strong as well in our own practice, so that we don't also get pulled into trying to do something that isn't actually aligned for us, which also opens up the question of prediction, doesn't it? We make one of the things that many people quite understandably would expect us to be able to do is to predict the future. Now, that's not something that's not part of my game. That's not what I'm up for. I'm not up for predicting what's going to happen in any kind of concrete or deterministic way. But does that mean I'm not interested in the future? No, of course I'm interested in the future, and of course we're going to talk about the future. But I'm not up for the question, what's going to happen to me next year? Is this venture going to be successful? Is this relationship going to work? I'm not going to answer that question. But I'm not going to dismiss the question either, because it's a perfectly legitimate question, and it's a perfectly understandable expectation that the person's bringing, right? But what I will do is I'll put the question, we'll hold the question there and get underneath it. We'll get underneath I'll look to get underneath what's behind that question. Speak to what's present right now that informs that question. Speak to the anxiety that's there around that. And then the chart and the astrology can really help to inform that. I don't know about you, but what I hope, part of my intention, I think, as a kind of general intention that I have in astrological work, is that something will happen during the session where the person realizes some kind of truth for themselves. They remember something, or they realize some kind of truth for themselves, which actually gives them clarity in being able to make a choice about what to do, or that helps give them confidence in some aspect of themselves.
Mm.
And that, in a way, that's a kind of divinatory experience, because something has come in at that point, something has turned at that point that opens. And I think this can happen in any really deep conversation, actually, even if astrology is not involved. We can get to that point. And it hasn't come by one person trying to answer the other person's conundrum. It's come through dropping deeper into the conundrum, dropping beneath it, bringing in stories or images or symbols from outside of the question. Because it's very hard to get clarity when you're too close to something. If it's right in your face, you can't see it. What astrology can do is it gives us a distance from it. We can bring in some other ideas or images and stories that can speak to it. And I think sometimes that's the spaciousness of that container can actually help to reveal what needs to be revealed.
Definitely. And thinking about something you touched on a few minutes ago, and I hadn't really brought this idea into my astrological practice, but it made a lot of sense as I was thinking about it now. And dealing with clients who are very resistant to vulnerability, or don't have a clear intention, or bring a level of skepticism. And you spoke about ways that we can work with that, ways that we can sort of encourage or really ask them to go deeper with us. And then I started thinking about aspects in a chart. And so we can show up in an opposition with our client. Right. And then we receive projection and we mirror, and it gets into a dynamic that can be really interesting, but isn't necessarily going to be the most productive and fruitful, at least at first. or we can turn the dial and see if we can come into a more Jupiterian or Venusian aspect with our client, a sextile, a trine. How can we sit together and create a harmonic here? How can we create a flow of energy that will hopefully be more abundant and create some potential for healing versus coming in with a square, a Marshall square, or that opposition, or dealing with the conjunction where my stuff is mixing with my client's stuff. And that's really not ideal for obvious reasons. But how do you encounter when you feel a client projecting onto you because you're potentially naming a truth about them or their life or what they're dealing with that is difficult for them to hear, or work that they have just begun or have not yet begun? And there's a tendency to maybe project and turn the astrologer into someone else or something else that we are not actually. Do you encounter that in your work sometimes? I know that when someone starts to go into projection on me, I utilize tools to interrupt that. And I know that we're getting somewhere because we're triggering a response. Okay. But what are your observations about that? And how do you deal with it when it comes up? Because it absolutely does.
The few things that come to mind, it was interesting you were talking about the trine, moving into more of a trine relationship. I know when I'm working face to face with people, I always like to sit at 120 degrees from them. I don't want to sit opposite.
Nice.
And I don't want to sit at 90.
Nope.
So
Nope.
sit at this nice open angle.
I do that too. Absolutely.
That's great.
Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah.
Because if you're sitting opposite them, you're more likely to, to be in that role. I think and it's also, you've got the excuse of having the chart between you, and having that angle between you actually means you can both look in at the chart, but you've got a nice energetic angle between you. So I think that works quite well.
Yeah.
And of course, you're working with projection, obviously. I mean, you're in any kind of counseling or consulting role, that's gonna be there. But it's really, as astrologers, we can have that added insight of what the dynamics of an opposition are, because that's a classic projection, would be in that oppositional aspect, right? So, and also to notice what planet is being projected onto us. Are we having Saturn projected onto us as the authority, or as the as the elder, or the one who has the body of knowledge? Or is it Jupiter? Are we, it's like, give me the inspiration I need, to go forward, or, is it Venus? Yeah, we kind of, because there's that thing of like, could it be that we're actually there to help them foster some kind of better relationship? And again, it depends on the area that we're working in. Mercury is an obvious role that we play. In fact, I think we play, and inevitably play, a mercurial role in our clients' lives. And I always like to be aware, one of the things I look at and really pay attention to is where the client's Mercury is. And, and in relation to my Mercury, and I have Mercury in Pisces, I love to go off and talk about myth and imagination, and, I love telling stories and going off into that realm. But if I've got a Mercury in Taurus person sitting in front of me, that probably isn't going to work.
Need to stay grounded for that person.
Grounded, it's like, show me the money, like, what's the bottom line here? Give me some straight answers. Even more if it was a Mercury and Aries person, it's like,
ooh, yes.
I don't be floundering around with my Piscean wanderings and ambiguities. They're going to want something more kind of definite, or directed anyway, perhaps.
I was just thinking about what you were saying about the opposition and what is being projected on us. And I was thinking about some reading and study that I did around lunar cycles a few years ago. And one of the speakers said, the full moon is the moment between the two lights of our solar system of the greatest tension, but also the greatest illumination.
Yeah, right.
Exactly. So there is illumination to be found in the tension of the projection and the opposition. And I love the examples that you gave around what is being projected onto us. What are people looking to us to give for them or do for them? And how can we shift that opposition and invite them to come into the chart in a more embodied way together. As astrologers, we're not here to solve your problems. I am also not a predictive astrologer. And as you said earlier, it is completely understandable that people want to know, oh, yeah, I'm thinking about starting a new job next year. I'm thinking about trying to get a promotion. I'm thinking about taking my relationship to a more serious level. What do you see in the chart? And so it's hard to completely avoid prediction. And I tend to invite people into the idea of energetic flow and themes and patterns. And on the fate versus free will debate around astrology, I lean much more into the free will aspect. I think that knowing what our astrology is doing can be very informative. And I think that we maintain free will as well. I don't think that the ancient notion that the planets are running the show and we're just along for the ride, I don't subscribe to that. I think most people don't in a very pure sense, but I'd be curious to hear a little more on your thoughts about that.
Yeah, and of course that makes us very different in the West, and it's very much a Western characteristic of the Western psyche, isn't it? I mean, this is not the case in Vedic astrology, which is highly predictive and deterministic, also highly ritualistic. Of course, you make your offerings. If you've got a malefic signature in a Vedic interpretation, then you would make your offering to that in order to lessen the impact of it. But a lot of that is about accepting your fate, and that's not a popular notion really in Western thinking. So we're very much in that realm that we are much more we have free will. We like to think we do, and we very much, at the very least, we are participating or negotiating with fate. I quite like that idea that we're negotiating with our destiny and with our fate. That it's not something that is fixed and established, although there may be patterns that if we don't bring consciousness to it, that we might almost become predictable. But I think what an astrological consultation is an intervention. We could see it as an intervention in fate. It's like, well, if you keep doing things the way you've always done it, you're going to get the same results. So you come to an astrologer maybe to get more illumination, that lovely term, which I think is an aspect of the raised awareness that comes from an opposition. And that comes from being able to hold tension as well, doesn't it? If you can hold the tension between opposing forces, that actually raises our awareness of those opposing forces, because usually when we're faced with something opposite to us, we demonize it or make it wrong or set ourselves against it, and we externalize the opposition. And as Jung said, when an inner situation is not made conscious, it happens outside as fate. When our own internal opposition is not recognized, it plays itself out as conflict in the world. So really, in many ways, I think the aim of astrological work, or any kind of a consciousness raising work, is to hold those oppositions within. And I think this is where we can work with that very, very powerfully. And to that extent, I think astrology becomes a kind of shadow work. It can show you where where you get caught up in unconscious patterns that end up running the show, and then end up maybe even looking fatalistic. Because I can't, I just keep doing this. I can't help myself, and it's like, well, what's really going on? What's underneath this? What's the deeper pattern? And
yes,
I think
I agree.
Interesting territory.
Yeah. And I think especially when we develop an ongoing relationship with the client and we get to work with them more than once, which is my favorite, and I'm happy to see people once. I do think that we can really get into our shadow. And with that, we're of course referring to Jung's idea that you so beautifully touched on earlier, John. And it's kind of the parts of ourselves that we are uncomfortable to see, the parts of ourselves that we judge or reject or need to process or put outside of ourselves because there's resistance in our systems to working with that material consciously. And it's understandable. It's very human and very natural. But I think especially clients with a lot of hard aspects or interesting placements with planets like Pluto or Mars or Saturn, there is such an invitation and an opportunity to do some shadow work. And anytime I see a natal chart for the first time, I'm excited. I think all charts are beautiful and unique in their own way, even all of the ones that are just trines and sextiles everywhere. Lucky them. But I get really lit up when I see a chart like mine, where there's multiple T-squares and oppositions and really challenging material to dive into in conversation. I get really inspired by that. Okay, all right, we got some friction in here. We've got some tension. And I think that square aspects, particularly that friction, really invites change. It invites a shift.
It invites a dynamism and dynamic characteristic in the character, in the person. And it's sometimes, when I do get clients with lots of trines and sextiles, more often than not, they're bored. They're not motivated.
Yeah.
They don't recognize the talents they've got because there's nothing necessarily kicking them into doing something with it, and classic thing, isn't it? When you see the grand trine in a chart and it's like, and you point out their ability and they go, well, I thought everyone could do that,
I have one, John. I have a grand air trine. So
well, that was just natural. Well, maybe it is too, but maybe you haven't realized the natural ability that you have, and maybe you're not, it's like he's pointing out or something. So yeah,
well, mine is Pluto, Mars, and the Sun, so it's complicated. But it is still a grand trine, and it's been interesting to explore over the course of my life. But yeah, I love it. I love some juicy hard aspects. I think they're really exciting to dive into, and there's so much potential for healing and growth and change and working through some shadow material with that. So
this question around, what are we doing as astrologers, and this expectation of this role that we have, here's a confession, right? So when I'm teaching my students, certainly when I'm taking them into the advanced levels, when we look at this question very specifically, and we'll address this thing of, okay, so your client wants to know, maybe they want to know what's going to happen, maybe they want to know what they should do, and maybe they want to know who they are, and to help you to define their character in some way, and my kind of advice to them would be, to the students I'm working with, would be like, do what you can to actually to not answer those questions in any definitive way. Right?
Yes.
Try and see if you can resist the temptation to try and predict, to try and give concrete, to hard advice, to try and nail their character trait, And that's
I don't think of us.
I mean,
but we're not fortune tellers. That's not what we do, right? We're not here to tell your fortune.
But it's and that's a practice. And another thing I'll often say is, like, come back to your own practice. If that's not what you've set yourself up to do, to be that concrete, then what can you do? Because just because you're not doing those things doesn't mean that you can't be of immense service to your client. I think of more service if you can suspend your own judgment rather than get caught up in trying to do something which you haven't, because it's amazing how often somebody who is not hasn't set up their practice to do that will try and do it. I've seen this with astrologers. They'll try because they want to try and please the client. They maybe get insecure, think, well, I should be able to, astrologers are supposed to be able to do this stuff, so I'm going to try. And, and some astrologers, they are set up that way to do that, which is fine, but if you're set up more to try and enable somebody to drop into a deeper understanding of themselves so that they can find their own realization and answer to these questions, then stay true to your practice and be prepared to respond to their question with another question and to drop beneath it. What is it? What's causing the anxiety around that and be informed by the astrology as you do that. What is it? What's the, you could say, well, I noticed, this Mercury Saturn dynamic in your chart that needs kind of hard, maybe that does that reflect some kind of part of you that really needs hard answers, that needs the hard evidence for what, so that you can have the confidence to take a leap of faith and do what your heart is telling you to do, and or whatever it is, to go to start to go into those places. And then you get into different territory, and then the thing can move, because often the person will come for a session because they feel stuck. They don't know which way to go. They're like in fear of like doing the wrong thing, making the wrong choice, fear of the future, feeling they've lost their confidence or direction. And it's if that new sense of meaning or purpose or direction can arise from that deeper place, I think it has more value than if you just tell someone.
Oh, I agree 100%. And I was also reflecting on right before you said the desire to please people, I thought it. So we're well connected. We're on the same wavelength today, John. And I definitely felt some pressure around that when I first started seeing clients a few years ago. I felt like the goal for me, and just insecurity as a new consulting astrologer, was I need to please my client, and that's my primary goal. And there's really been a shift for me of more of an approach of what you're naming around answer their questions often with another question. Why does that feel important to you right now? Or what's the ultimate outcome that you're hoping for with that in your life? Or, have you encountered this type of circumstance before? And what did you learn from that? Versus trying to provide an answer or a solution or a response. I don't view that as my role as the astrologer. I think that if people can do some work around coming to a depth of understanding about what's going on in their life and patterns and trends, and come to their own realization and subsequent decision from a place of self-knowing, then that decision is going to be even more meaningful than if I had just given them what I think is the solution.
Right.
I don't live their life. I don't have their chart. I don't have all the inner complexities of their life experience. So I think that it would be a disservice to the client for me to try to answer questions for them in that way, or even help them make decisions about their life from a perspective that I have any level of expertise about what they should do. So it's very mercurial. I love that you named that earlier. I think that we are the psychopomp for our clients. We are traveling between the realms. We are traveling to the realm of Zeus and the gods and the heavens, and gathering the starlight and the light of the planets and the sun, and bringing that down. And we are also going into the realm of Pluto, or whatever chthonic reference you want to make. And we are shining light on the shadow that's in there, and we are making and holding space for the difficult experiences of life. And we're moving between all of those spaces in a very mercurial fashion, and bringing it all together and holding it in the pot or the kettle or the cauldron, so that something can cook off and emerge and be created out of that process. So I love the Hermes, the Mercury reference that you made earlier.
Yeah, really I agree. I mean, we are inevitably playing a Hermetic role in our clients' lives. And as you say, Hermes, the psychopomp, can move between the worlds, can pass messages between the worlds. But as you're talking, it's reminding me that there's another important psychopomp figure now that we now work with in modern astrology, and that's Chiron. The wounded healer, who literally crosses in his orbit, crosses between the visible realms of the traditional planets and the invisible realms of the outer planets. And we even know now that that Chiron and the other centaurs actually, it seems like they originate from the Kuiper belt out in Pluto's realm, and they've temporarily come into our field, and moving into, in these, the other centaurs, Nessus, Pholus, they even move out beyond Neptune, right? So then, they go even further out, but Chiron will move between inside the field of Saturn and almost out as far as Uranus, kind of as Dane Rudyard once put it, this is a kind of cosmic fecundation. That was the term he used, I think. Like they're
beautiful.
cross-pollinating between the remote outer planets, which seem to have a will of their own and difficult for us to integrate, and the realm of the planets that we can integrate, the ones that we can see visually with our own eyes, out to Saturn. And so I think Chiron and also with Chiron bringing this quality of the wound and bringing the medicine. Again, we're talking about the medicine. I think for me, as well as Mercury inevitably being an overlighting power that inevitably works with me as an astrologer, Chiron also. I feel that Chiron is a guide. I have a Sun Chiron conjunction, so I identify strongly with that character and that archetype. But I think that there is a role there for us, a healing role, and I think that the acknowledgement of the wound, which is a particular aspect of the shadow, which makes sense if Chiron has come out of Pluto's field, right? Pluto's realm, that the wound, I think a lot about this distinction between the shadow and the core wound that we carry, which, and when we touch that core wound, that most painful place, that place that it appears would never heal, somewhere, if we can authentically bear that wound and have it witnessed, and it touches into some very profound aspect of our vocation to heal, and I think that's for me, that we talk about the role of the astrologer. That's a role that I connect with very strongly, is that that this is a kind of medicine, and we talked about this last week with the on the last episode where we were talking about the zodiac and I talk about it as a medicine wheel, and and that's kind of borrowing from another tradition, but I think in a sense it's a deep, the zodiac itself is deep rooted in the psyche, and each sign, I think, carries a particular quality of the medicine, and each image of the zodiac has been twisted, contorted a bit, out of shape, and that way of kind of going to that place where our perspectives on ourselves are kind of twisted, wounded, in shadow, how we recover those. And we could do that for each of the planets. We could see how each of the planets the perspective of each of the planets is wounded in us somewhere, and how we can recover that, So I think that and I think the Chironic perspective gives us that ability to bring those, to bridge that world of these powerful outer planet forces, how to bring those into something that we can actually integrate. Saturn's the great, gives us that ability to integrate things into the body and into the life and into the plan of our life and all of that. Yeah.
Can really hear your Sun Chiron conjunction speaking. It's beautiful. My Jupiter Chiron conjunction appreciates it too.
We just had the return of that conjunction, of course, at the weekend. That's amazing.
Yeah. Fascinating stuff. Well, John, what a wonderful conversation today. As usual, we got into some really interesting territory, and I'm sure our listeners enjoyed some of our random Mercury and Pisces tangents too, things we didn't intend to talk about today. So fun. And we're going to come back and have another conversation here later this month, and a topic will be announced soon. So excited to share that with folks. But just want to thank you, John, for the great conversation today. It's been really a pleasure.
Yeah, it's been great. And it makes me think that maybe the next conversation is going to bring us more into that kind of idea of the embodied, what it is to embody the symbolism.
Wonderful. And that's a really unique approach to astrology that I think is still pretty uncommon. There's a few folks out there who identify as embodied astrologers, but I think our listeners will be excited to learn more about what that actually means and what your practice looks like and how you do that work. So that'll be a fascinating conversation as well. And with that, we just want to remind everybody to please subscribe so you don't miss future episodes of Confessions of an Astrologer. And we look forward to connecting with you. If you enjoyed our conversation today and you're on a platform that allows you to leave us a like or a comment, make sure you do that. We want to hear what you think. And if you have ideas about other things you'd like to hear John talk about in the future, let us know. And thank you so much for listening. And thanks again, John, for a great conversation.
Pleasure. Enjoyed it a lot.